Lydia and I and the children went to the park on Thursday evening just to give the kids a run, and we played a little game of hide and seek amongst the trees. All very autumnal, all very Instagram, I suppose, with the conkers shells on the floor and the leaves being kicked and that sort of thing. Now, our youngest two, a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, they still don't quite get hide and seek. They can't seem to stay behind the tree. As soon as I say, I'm coming to find you, they jump out, as little kids do. And now, the thing is, they have no fear of me finding them. They have perhaps no fear of me, which is perhaps a parenting issue that I need to sort out. They quite like being found by me. We play hide and seek as grown-ups. That's what we call adults, isn't it? Grown-ups. And maybe not literally. Maybe not literally. But perhaps you do. Perhaps you do. But we all do it spiritually. We all do it spiritually. We all want to try to run away from God and hide from him. But the difference with us is that we don't like being found. And 3 points this morning as we look at one verse from Jonah, that one verse that Samuel read, and 3 points on the bottom of your bulletin sheet there. First of all, we try to escape from God. We try to escape from God. Now, I know you could say, in response to that, we could say, first of all, well, I'm a Christian. Look, I'm a Christian, and I'm not trying to run from God in my life. But look, Jonah was an Israelite. Jonah was an Israelite. Jonah was one of the people of God, and more than that, he was a prophet in Israel. He spoke for God, but he tried to run away from God. That's what it says in chapter 1, verse 3. Have a look at that. Chapter 1, verse 3, but Jonah ran away from the Lord. So Jonah is on his own mission. He's not on God's mission. He's on his own mission. His mission to get away from God, which even he knows is dumb. Jonah knows it's dumb, it's stupid. He admits that to the sailors on the boat in chapter 1, verse 9. Chapter 1, verse 9, he tells the sailors, look, I'm a Hebrew, an Israelite. I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, who made the sea and the dry land. So he knows himself that trying to run from God is stupid. God made the sea and the dry land that he's on. He's sailing the sea that he's sailing through. He can't get away from God. But it doesn't stop him trying. He's desperate to get away from God. Remember, God has given Jonah this mission to go to the city of Nineveh, this great city, 120,000 people, to tell them that God is going to come in judgment against that city unless they repent and come to him for forgiveness. But Jonah doesn't want to do that mission, so he runs the other way. And he's so desperate that he even tells the sailors on that boat when they're in the middle of the storm that God has sent, that it's his fault that the storm has come. And he says that what they need to do is throw him overboard so he would drown. See, Jonah would rather drown than do what God wants him to do and live. So look, even believers in God run away from God. You're probably doing it now in your life, one way or the other. We all are. We all do. The other response might come from someone who's not a Christian, an unbeliever. And they might say, well, look, I'm not trying to run away from God. I'm not even sure there is a God. How can I be running away from God when I'm not sure there is a God? And I think the Bible would say that saying that there probably isn't a God is actually a way of running away from God, of trying to hide from him. The Bible makes the argument, that's why I had Kath read from Romans chapter 1 earlier. The Bible makes the argument that it is obvious that there is a God. It is obvious. It is clear. So, Romans chapter 1, verse 20, ever since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Now look, you see, it's not exactly complicated. If something looks fairly technical, like a Duplo house, it probably didn't just randomly arrive. You shake the box and out comes a Duplo house. Instead, there would have been a designer, and a builder, a 3-year-old, with the brain power and the ability to make the Duplo house appear. And there's a universe with amazing complexity, and it's utterly extraordinary. There's clearly a designing power creator behind it all. There has to be. That's what the Bible says. Now, all right, of course, some people out there say, well, no, there isn't. There's just there's multiple universes. There's multiple universes, and if you have enough multiple universes and enough unlimited time, then eventually, accidentally, you will get a universe like ours. Now look, even that to me doesn't seem to completely get rid of the idea of God, I suppose, but most people around here, it seems to me, do believe in a God still. That questionnaire work that Jamie and I have been going around the local area doing with people, we ask people, the first question, our 3-question questionnaire, the first question is, do you think there is something out there? Scale 1 to 10, what do you think? And most people seem to say about 5 or 6. Genuinely, I can show you the results. 5 or 6. Most people out there think there is a God, and it's like when we're speaking to these people, the door opens just a moment, just a crack. The door opens into eternal realities. And they say, yes. Actually, you know what? I haven't thought about that for a long time. Yeah, there probably is a God, you know. But then you say to the very same people, well, would you like to think about that God that there might be, and how, if he is there, you can make sure that you are right with him, so that when you die and you meet him, all will be well. Do you want to investigate that at all? Response is nearly always, no, you're okay, mate. And the door shuts, metaphorically and literally. Not interested. Now that makes no sense. That is not logical, is it? But that's the response we get time and time again. It's not logical. You'd think people who were open to the idea that there could be an all-powerful creating God who they might meet when they die, you'd think that these people, some of them at least, would like to know a bit more and to think it through. But no, they don't. They shut the door. What does that tell you? Doesn't it tell you that people are like Jonah? They'll do anything to get away from God. I'll get deep now. Blaise Pascal was a French philosopher. How often do we do French philosophy here on a Sunday morning? Not very often. Nearly 500 years ago, Blaise Pascal, and he made an argument that was known as Pascal's wager, the wager. It's great, the wager. He said this, right? He said this. Look, if you're not sure whether or not there is a God, then you may as well bet that there is a God. You may as well bet that there is a God. Because if you die and it turns out there is a God, you get to go to heaven. But if you've bet that there is a God and you die and there is no God, or you won't know about it, so there's no great loss, you may as well bet on there being a God and trust and believe in him. But of course, most people, especially nowadays in our part of the world, don't believe in him. Certainly not in the kind of, I'm going to nail my colours to the mast sort of thing. Yes, I am a believer. It's always, no, I'm not sure, maybe there could be, couldn't there? Do you want to know about him? No, thanks, mate, I'm all right. Everyone's running from God. When we were kids, I don't know what the latest computer games kids play these days. I've lost all interest. But when we were kids, we used to play a game called Lemmings. Who remembers Lemmings? On the Amiga or something like this. It turns out that lemmings are real animals. But I'm not sure if they actually do what they did in the game. But in the game, they kind of like, you get a stream of lemmings just making their way to the cliff edge. And your job in the game was, I think it was like build bridges or land or so, rearrange the land so the lemmings wouldn't fall off the cliff and perish. It's like everyone's a lemming. And eternity is coming. We're all, each and every one of us, going to hit the cliff edge. But virtually no one wants to make sure they are ready for the cliff edge when it comes. In all different kinds of ways, men and women are running from God. In our day and age, I suppose the main ways people are hiding from God is hiding from the idea of death. I could talk about hospices. I think they're interesting, but you've probably had very good experiences with hospices, but I think they're an interesting sort of thing in our generation. But what about funerals and kids? It's far less common these days for people to take children to funerals. I want to protect them from the idea of death. Now, I want to suggest to you that you do take children to funerals. Your own children, you understand, not just random children to random funerals. That wouldn't be particularly good Anyway, you could discuss that one later. You might want to take me to task on that one. Death is a taboo. We don't want to talk about it. We're running from God, running from reality. What about healthy living? In the news this week, apparently students off to university this week, or this time of year, of course, students are drinking less alcohol than ever before. Students are healthier than ever. I don't know how they manage that on pot noodles, but apparently that's true. That's a good thing. Don't get me wrong. But it's part of a wider move in our culture, isn't it? Towards this obsession with healthy living that there is. Billions spent on the healthy living industry. Death is coming, but hide from it as long as you possibly can by keeping yourself as healthy as you can. Or what about stuff? Material stuff and experiencing stuff. Having experiences is the big thing these days, isn't it? It sort of moved on from buying stuff to having a brilliant experience. You can buy an experience, doing this, that, and the other. So fill your life with stuff, fill your life with experiences, and fill it with enough stuff so you will forget about the cliff edge. And every day you get nearer and nearer that cliff edge, and you can't see the edge of the cliff. So it could be tonight. We're all trying to run from God. But secondly, God will find you wherever you go. God will find you wherever you go. So Jonah is running from God, but he knew he was being stupid. He knew he couldn't really run away from God, because he knew that God was the maker of the dry land and the sea. I'm running from the God who I know I can't escape from, basically he's saying. So the sailors, if you remember, they find out that the storm has come because Jonah is running away from God. And not just like, this God isn't just like their little local gods that they believe in, but the big God, the big one, the real one, the huge creator God. And that's why this terrible storm has come. But verse 13 in chapter 1, instead of getting rid of Jonah straight away, notice that in verse 13 it says that they're nice guys. So they row harder to try and get out of the storm. But the storm just gets worse and worse and worse. They're left with no option but to throw Jonah overboard. See if it does actually stop the storm. And Jonah just runs with it. No complaints, no problem. And so we imagine Jonah tumbling down through the sea, and the Israelites were not good swimmers. I'm not a very good swimmer either. Is it me, or is it just, can some people just not swim? Is that a fact? Because that must be the reason, because I cannot get the hang of it. So there's Jonah, and he's quickly in trouble in the sea. Down he falls, oxygen running out quickly. Certain death is coming. And that's bad, of course, certain death. But, well, at least he hasn't got to go to Nineveh. But then, verse 17, now the Lord provided huge fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah thought he could escape from God, even though he knew he couldn't in theory. And you see, it's like a vivid picture, this, of an ultimate spiritual reality. You cannot get away from God. That's a spiritual fact. You cannot literally get away from God. He's everywhere. Everywhere you go, he is there. He fills everything. He is not limited to time or to space. If you went to the furthest little rock on the most distant, galaxy in our universe, you will find God there. He will find you there. You cannot get away. He's everywhere, wherever you go. The Bible says that there is no escape from God when you die. Hebrews chapter 9 verse 27, people are destined to die once and then face God in judgment. Death isn't the end of you and God. Death is no escape from God. And so here's Jonah, as close to death as you can possibly get. He's seconds away. No more oxygen. He's running out when a huge fish, swallows him whole. Now, I'd like to say that it is a vivid picture, a wonderful picture of a spiritual reality, this spiritual reality that you cannot escape from God. People will hear me say that and perhaps think that we're not saying this actually happened. But I don't think there's any problem at all with believing that Jonah was swallowed whole and kept alive in the belly of a fish. People will hear it, of course, and say it's impossible, a load of nonsense, like the whole Bible's a load of nonsense, because it's full of these miracles to happen. But you see, the thing that people who say that fail to realise is that we are talking about a different category of thing altogether. We're talking here about miracles. Miracles. And the whole point of a miracle is that it isn't normal. Yes, of course it couldn't physically happen ordinarily. This is a miracle. The whole point of miracles is that they aren't normal. They are God intervening in the world in a supernatural, unusual way. That's a miracle. If there's a God, let's say there is. Let's just assume there's a God. An all-powerful creator God. Can he create a big enough fish to swallow a man whole and then make sure that there's enough oxygen in that fish for 3 days for him to survive? Of course he can. It's not a problem. God thought up fish. God thought up oxygen. God thought up people. It's not a problem for him to be able to do that if he wants to do it. There are other reasons to think the story is genuine. Here's the big one. Here's the big reason to think this story is genuine. The resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection of Jesus is the miracle to end all miracles. Jesus, there he was, completely dead in the tomb. Completely and utterly dead. Cold, dead. And he comes back to life in a new, eternal way. That's far more unlikely than Jonah and the fish surviving, isn't it? Hundreds of people, of course, after Jesus died and rose again, hundreds of people claimed to have seen him, and there were scores of people who were willing to die for the fact. I met a man in town on Monday doing some leafleting for the church, a lovely man, and he openly told me that he was very spiritual. He said, I'm a very spiritual man. I've investigated different religions and philosophies, and after all my investigations, Christianity is the most profound and the most deep religion philosophy out there. So profound, he said. And I agreed with him, of course it is. But he said the big problem for him, the thing that stopped him saying he is a Christian, is the resurrection. He just couldn't buy that. He just said the resurrection was just a step too far. So he'd go along with much of Christianity, but Jesus coming back from the dead, no, he said. And I said to him, well, look, if there's no resurrection, then Christianity falls down. If Jesus stayed dead, then our sins aren't paid for, and we've no hope of defeating death when we die. But he said to me, no, it's just too much. I can't possibly believe that. And Jesus is God's son, who was dead in the grave. And if you don't believe that, then there's no Christianity. And I said to him, look, this isn't logical. It's not logical, this. Do you believe in God? And he said, oh yeah, I do believe in a God. Definitely there's a God. So how can it be then that resurrection is impossible? I said to him. And he said, he just changed the topic. It can't be impossible, can it, if there's a God? Do you see how much people want to hide from God? Even this man who purported to be a very spiritual man. It's not logical. If there's a God, miracles can happen, no problem. And one can swallow Jonah in full, keep him safe. And that's what God did, and God found him. You cannot escape God. Death itself is no escape from God. The depths of the sea are no escape from God. You cannot escape him, which is a problem. It's a problem if God is angry with you. And God was angry with Jonah for running away from him. And it's a problem for all of us, because that storm is coming to all of us. The bigger storm, the real storm, the storm of God's eternal judgment in hell against rebels like you and me. And so thirdly and lastly, only God can rescue you from God. That's the final point. And so you see, Jonah's running away from God. And we're all trying to run away from God. Everyone has in one way or the other. And even us Christians, we try to do it. But Jonah can't escape from God, and sends this fish to swallow him whole. And you can't escape from God, and I can't. No one can escape from God. It is absolutely impossible. You can't get away from God. Death takes you to God and to judgment. God has to judge the world if he is going to be God, which is a massive problem. It's a common theme in nightmares, this, isn't it? Trying to run away from someone who is out to get you. Do you have that? I'm sure everyone's had that nightmare, one way or the other. And you wake up in a cold sweat, don't you? So having had that dream, your heart's been pounding, and there's relief at the end when you think, oh, it's a dream, it's extraordinary. You're running as hard as you possibly can. You can't get away. And you wake up and you're shattered. It's a theme of lots of films as well, isn't it? Lydia went to watch what's a horror film that's out at the minute in the cinema? About some tall, gangly, slender man. Slender Man is what Lydia went to see. Is that what you're thinking? No, it's something Slender Man. She said it was more of a comedy. She said it was ridiculous. That's how horror films seem to be these days. The really horrific ones, the really horrible ones, are the ones that get under your skin and the ones that get into your head, like the old Hitchcock movies, like Birds. Just terrifying. I mean, it looks stupid, but it's just terrifying for it. Or No Country for Old Men. Perhaps you watched that. People, someone chasing you down and you cannot escape. Humanity, all humanity, is running away from God, running as hard as it possibly can to get away from God, but it can't. The more you run away from God, the nearer you get to him, you see, because if you die, you will end up in front of him. You can't escape him. Now look, just imagine, this is the first time you've heard the story of Jonah. Imagine that. Maybe it's the first time you've heard the story. And when the fish swallows Jonah, you don't know if that's good news or bad news to you. Because, well, you probably think it's bad news, because you'd think if a fish ordinarily swallowed you whole, that was you done for. It's only when you get to the bit in chapter 2, when the fish spits Jonah out into the dry land, that you know it's good news, that he's been rescued. And so it's strange, isn't it? The book of Jonah, it really makes you think, because it's God who sends the storm that's going to kill Jonah in judgment, but it's also God who sends the fish that rescues him. Do you see? It's a wonderful picture of a spiritual truth that you and I, we have to grasp. The only way to escape from God is to go to him. He's the only one who can save you from himself. There was another thinker, a Christian thinker, called Augustine. Great story. The story of Augustine's life, his conversion, becoming a Christian. This is like 1700 years ago or something. And Augustine said this famously, right? He said, "There is no place where you may flee from an angered God except to a God who is pacified. There is absolutely no place for you to flee to. Do you want to flee from him? Rather flee to him." And you see, just in a wonderful, wonderful way, Jonah in the fish gives us a picture of that wonderful rescue that God performs for us. You see, God who sent the storm also sent a fish to swallow Jonah whole. But he sent his one and only Son, if you like, to swallow us. Now, okay, the New Testament never says that Jesus swallowed us, but it does say again and again, when we put our trust in him, God sees us as being in him. And it's the piece of paper in the Bible illustration. Now, I've done it. If you've been here 6 months, you've seen me do this before, but some of you are new. This is us. And if you imagine this is Jesus, and we put our trust in Jesus, we get united to Jesus. We're hidden inside of him. So wherever we are, we're inside Jesus. And when God looks down at us, he doesn't see us, doesn't see our mess, our sin, our shame, our guilt, our wrong. He sees the perfect record of Jesus. All the good, all the perfection, all the glory of Jesus. He looks at you and me, if we're trusting in Jesus, and he sees Jesus. It's absolutely wonderful. That's what happens spiritually, you see. It happens. What happens to Jesus happens to me, happens to you. Jesus died, I die spiritually. Jesus rises to new life, I rise to new life spiritually. Jesus is in heaven now. Spiritually, we're in heaven now. It's like we've been swallowed by Jesus. But Jesus, you see, he isn't just the one who is sent by God to rescue. He is also the judge who will be sent by God to judge the whole world. So you see, only the judge of the world can save you from the judgment of the world. And Jesus is the Son. Jesus is God. The only one who can save you from the anger of God and his hell is the same God who sent his one and only Son in the world to die in your place. Do you ever get maggots in your bin? Do you get maggots? Who wants to own up to that? No, you'll say, I don't get maggots in my bin. I think we had maggots in our little compost bin once, just once. And they've been dealt with, I can assure you. I empty it more regularly now. Now, you look down at maggots, don't you, in the bottom of your bin. And you say, do you ever say to yourself, well, I would really like to get down there with the maggots. And if I could somehow, one way or another, I'd like to rescue them from their terrible fate of being squashed. Or what do you do with maggots? I don't know. Squash them, maybe. Now, look, we aren't maggots. I know we're not maggots. We are more precious than maggots. But the distance, you understand, the distance between us and maggots is far less than the distance between God and us. At least us and maggots are created beings. God is not a created being. So the distance is far greater. But what God did is he looked down in our mess, in our terrible, terrible state, and we were going to be squashed. We deserve to be. But he said, I love these people, these creations of mine, and I'm going to send my son to die in their place for them. The guy I met in the street on Monday was right. Christianity is far more profound and deep and satisfying than any other religious system or philosophical system out there. Far more satisfying. The sad thing was that he didn't know the half of it. We're going to sing.